short amount of time for a very, very, very big topic. And in fact, the topic for today, preparing for careers in the academy, is the topic, right, of PROV 701, which I've taught for the last 2 years, which goes on for an entire academic year. So we're going to kind of just, begin this conversation, and I want to encourage all of you to consider applying for PROV 701. Shannon Davis will be the instructor in the fall, I believe. We kind of do a rotation, 2 years on, 2 years off. But the feedback on that course, it's not just because I've taught it, but because, I like to think it's because I was teaching, but really it is a highly beneficial course that gives you an opportunity to create and get a lot of feedback on what is your job application dossier. And we'll talk a little bit about what that entails today. My name is Jamie Lester. I'm an associate professor of higher education here at Mason. I've been here since 2008. And my research is around organizational change, leadership, and more recently, learning analytics within higher education institutions. So not only do I work in higher education institutions and have gone through, job searches and been on search committees and the tenure process and all of that, I also study higher education. So I like to think I'm sort of uniquely poised to be able to talk about what it means in terms of the landscape of higher education generally, but also what you need to do to prepare for these kinds of jobs. My PowerPoint clearly does not want to work, so does anyone want to volunteer to tinker with it for a few minutes while I talk? Because I don't want to waste time. Thanks, Carrie. Carrie's my graduate research assistant, so she's also obligated to assist me with all matters that, of my own personal challenge. No, that does not include dry cleaning, but mostly just office-related things. Actually, it's fantastic in a lot of ways. So, what I intend to do today is really, I'm a realist, right? I don't mince words, and I like to think that and I know not all of you know me, but I would hope, some of you know each other, some of you don't know each other, I would hope that we're able to have a really honest conversation today about what is going on in the academy, what you need to do to prepare for these jobs, and I want you to feel that this is Vegas, right? So we have a cone of silence over this room. What you say in here, even if you're in the same department, should not be shared with any of your other colleagues. Don't feel that there, I hope we can all agree that there's some sense of confidentiality in this room. These are important topics, these are personal topics, and you need to know what, really straight dope, right? You want to know. And so I'm going to be very practical today in terms of what I think you need to do. I certainly want your feedback. I want this to be interactive. And, please ask questions while I'm presenting, even if I get this PowerPoint to ever work. But let's make this as interactive as possible. And please do know that, anything that is said in here, I hope we can all agree will not move beyond these particular doors. Agreed? Is that thumbs up if you agree? Cool. All right. Why don't we do a really quick introduction if you just maybe say your name and maybe less than one sentence or less of what you want to know about this topic today. So quickly, because again, we have a lot to talk about. Anybody can start. We do not have to go in the very comfortable circle that we all love in every class.
My name is Sharon Spradling, and I'm curious about everything that's changing in the whole academic world in terms of the way universities hire.
Okay, that's going to take 30 years to talk about, but then we'll be good. Okay.
I'll go next. I'm Sarah Stanley, and I guess what I'm most interested is hearing about some of the highs and lows of academia to see if it's worth pursuing.
Absolutely.
Laura Stokes. You guys put me on the spot. I would like to know more about the best things to get into your first job.
Cool. We're going in the circle.
Brian Neville. I'm interested in how best to kind of have one foot outside of academia and one foot in and be credible in both worlds.
Yep.
I'm Katie Bryson. I've heard that your first job kind of sets the scheme for your whole career. So I'm just interested in how to find a really good job that will help keep more doors open for you.
I am Khalid. I think what I'm curious about is that I've been a therapist for quite some time, and now I am working in academic job. So I don't know how to fit myself really in the academic field.
My name's Kimberly Meyer, and I've been to about 4 of these workshops recently with different people at different conferences, so I'm just interested in getting a lot of different people's feedback or information about them.
My name is Pin. Actually, it's my first time to be here to this workshop, and I'm interested in the academic job.
Cool. Well, welcome. It's my first time too. Who does that?
I'm Jennifer Salikian. I'm really just interested in everything everybody else already said. I don't really have anything new to add there.
Great.
Myrna Salas, and so I guess I'm interested in learning about the structure, of academia, I guess, because I'm not really very familiar with it. So.
Sure.
My name's Elizabeth, and to echo what was said at the middle table, I'm interested in positioning myself for a job, and if that happens to be in academia and support in academia or teaching or not, so sort of how to get hired.
Sure. So there's some realities there, right? Like,
Yes.
You gotta pay your bills.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Emily, and I'm also interested in what Elizabeth and Brian both said, like fluidity. And I'm also interested in knowing the difference, the differences between like the small teaching colleges and big state colleges.
Absolutely.
My name is Aubrey Whitehead, and I'm really just interested in knowing the different options, whether it's research or teaching or like just what's that balance and what kind of out there.
Great.
I'm Aoi Yamanaka. I'm interested in knowing like the various options, job options in this field, and also steps toward getting those.
So I'm Carrie Klein again, and I am interested in knowing more about having a balanced portfolio so that I am as marketable as possible on market.
I'm Megan, all of the above.
There you go.
Adrienne Thompson, and I'd like to learn more about just the academic job process in general, because I know more about the administrative side, so this is kind of a new realm for me.
Sure.
Melissa Hobart. I'm interested in how I can build a binational reputation.
Great. Everyone's like, that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Can I do that too? How do I do that? Yeah.
Great. I'm Jamie Dolan, and I'm actually interested in alternatives to tenure track or to adjuncting, like research professor or working on research.
Sure.
That's actually almost what I was going to say.
All
It's
right.
the research area, like
Yeah.
kind of navigating teaching versus research, aimed at research.
And your name is?
Bradley Williams.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Joel Hicks. It's sort of, I think we have a theme at this table. I'm kind of curious how to navigate presenting myself as a credible non-tenure track instructor. I have good reasons why I don't want to go tenure track, but I really want to be committed to teaching and serious.
Yeah. Well, let me just quickly challenge you all for a minute, and I would just sort of plant a seed, is that I think that what I've seen over the years and what I experienced as a graduate student is that we think that tenure track jobs function in the way that we see our advisors operate within them, and that's how we think that people do these jobs. And in fact, the way that people do these jobs is influenced by a ton of different variables, and you have a ton of flexibility in how you do these jobs and how you do them successfully. And one thing I'll mention is career stage matters tremendously, right? So what I did and how I worked in this job as an assistant professor, eventually having one child, and how I operate in this job as an associate professor with 2 children, 2 is definitely more than 1, I've learned. There's no doubt about that. Is different, right? Just like my empty nester faculty friends operated, right? So you have a lot of different ways. So I want to just put that out there, and maybe I'm not, maybe this doesn't apply to you, but really think about and get lots of feedback. Someone over here said they've been to a bunch of these and want different perspectives. It's really important that you talk to a lot of different people at different institutions about how they do this kind of work, because you're going to get a lot of different answers, which is good. It tells you that you have a certain amount of flexibility in how you function within this job. I mean numbers of hours, when you work, how long you work, how many hours you work, how efficient you are, what kind of work you produce, where you publish that work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to plant that seed as a part of our conversation. So, oh, we had one person, we were just saying name and like one brief question or what you want to get out of it.
Hi, I'm Rich Weissman. I a lot of the questions.
Cool, awesome. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about the landscape of higher education. We're going to talk about the stages of preparation. My guess is that many of you are like in this zone of sort of graduate school activities, right? You're taking classes, you're maybe starting to form that research project. Depending on your discipline or field, you may be actively writing portions of your dissertation. Some of you may be on the cusp of preparing for that job search, but my guess is most of you are not in the zone of conducting that job search. Either way, we're going to go over each of these stages because they are different, and what you want to do 2 or 3 years out of that job search versus being in that job search does differ. So we're going to go through again some sort of practical advice on what you need to do to prepare. We're going to talk a little bit about like maintaining resiliency or sort of taking a reality check, right? Like how do you go through this process of all of it, right? From sort of soup to nuts. Like it's a really long term, it can be very stressful process. What do you need to do to sort of support yourself? And I want to leave a lot of questions, time for questions and discussion. And again, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question. Like I want this to be interactive, so don't be shy. I have a lot of comics throughout this because I just like comics. But here's my major caveat, right? In teaching 701 over the years and in being an interdisciplinary scholar who collaborates across many different colleges and fields, there are differences, right? There are unique disciplinary differences. I am not all-knowing on all of the nuances of each discipline. So what's really important about what I say today is that you double check that with those mentors, advisors, colleagues, and friends in your discipline. Interestingly enough, as I've taught 701 over the last 2 years, I've been surprised at how many similarities there are. So my view, there are more similarities than differences, from social sciences to sciences to engineering to humanities to education, that there are more similarities than differences. But there are some nuances there, and you really want to make sure that you learn about the cultural and social norms of your particular discipline. And we'll talk through today about how you can do that. So this is my little caveat, but again, keep in mind, more similarities than differences, but you still need those. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the landscape of higher education, and in fact, you're going to think and talk about it more than me. So what I want you to do is individually take like a little scrap piece of paper out or a handy-dandy electronic device. I want you to write down 3 to 5 observations that you have about higher education as it relates to the academic job market. What do you observe about it? Then we're going to get into groups. Maybe we'll just work at these tables since we have these nice round tables, and then we'll share as an entire group. I'm going to give you like a minute and a half. Like what comes to mind? Observations, higher ed, academic job market.
Education team starts walking. Oh, yeah. I had that happen one time. Got to the drink class. Oh, yeah.
You guys look down, you guys almost 15 more seconds. I won't count down. I do this exercise exercise videos, and they're always like counting down. I'm like, 10 seconds is a long time. Stop counting. I just want to fall on the floor. All right, go ahead. Whatever you have down at this point is great. I want you to go ahead in your tables. I want you to talk about your observations. What are some similarities and differences in what you've observed, and how do those shape your perspectives of the academic job search, right? In the beginning, we talked a little bit about seeing, what are you seeing, and how does that shape what you believe about tenure track jobs, for example? Like, how does this shape your ideas around the academic job market? I'll give you about maybe 8 minutes or so.
I only had two observations there, because it seemed
It's competitive.
but I said
It's
it's
terrible. And it's terrifying.
and the academic process and the reality of the job.
Those are my three.
Because just watching what our department did, bringing in new faculty, it was a very, I thought, elaborate and time-consuming process. So we're bringing in what it's like, it's the equivalent to what like the military does for a new general, but yet you're bringing in like the lowest person on the totem as far as like the new person that comes in is like the lowest associate professor when they come in, and yet like there's 3 days worth of interviews, meetings, dinners, like the person isn't left alone for like 36 hours. What's that? Yeah, you get okay, you're like, especially linguistics, it's like and it just seems antiquated, and the fact and all the materials that you have to present and everything. I mean, I know that in some ways like it is a different job, but everything that's required seems more along the lines of hazing than onboarding.
Could be, actually.
It's just my opinion. I agree with what what they have is like they have these candidates and these stuff could like come in and just talk or whatever. And then they also were asking
Like your research grant went out?
Yeah. And then go to launch that.
To launch her, yeah.
This would be like very
Yeah.
the person,
Right.
And then to get jobs or something.
Everything's negotiable.
Like I said,
Right.
because that's how, like at my
Well, and also it's not so way and everything like negotiable. Because I feel like every person I talk to adds something to the mix.
Right.
like, I mean, teaching 5 classes at tenure track positions where you get to publish, where you make $40,000 a year. Like,
Right.
you need like,
No. What did you have to say?
it was very competitive. I saw it's hard to break in.
Yeah.
But I haven't had that experience like you guys have.
Of like with the like new faculty coming in and like yeah.
Well, my experience outside of academia is very similar to the process that you were describing.
Oh, okay.
To bring somebody.
Yeah.
So like to me, 2-day interview was presentations and going out to lunch. I think it's too
Or just being stuck in that position. So jobs are opening and then you're just taking your first job at time one and you're granted there aren't going to be any jobs. How do you even get out of that?
I guess that's not.
Well, it also depends, like, in our department, so it's interesting because there's sort of this growing historical fight within the English department. You have the sort of lit people who their power is shrinking.
That's what I'm trying to do. Moonlight as a dad.
Is growing and like what maybe what,
Right.
where we come from and what.
Depending on where you are and what your job is.
And like the lit people, what constitutes good
Oh,
school
yeah, no,
is like
they're
almighty
the
lead.
big.
And so then when like.
We'll be making like a tiny
Power clash, like on.
That is so true.
Who's trying to get hired, and so it also depends on what you do. Really big, like multidisciplinary departments or sort of multi, almost like we have departments within departments. Can make it really difficult too, I think, because there's just sort of like some weird dynamics. And depending, and like, you know, if the department is huge or has a lot of like people who are getting near retirement, you're doing full jobs no matter what field it's
what you
in.
want to do,
They might
the
not
student
see that
population that you want to work
as-
with, which is, yeah.
You know, they may not see like.
Another minute before we share as an entire group. 1 more minute.
Because they're still like, they got their PhD 30 years ago.
Right.
And they're all.
That doesn't pay.
And you don't know who's bus draft for 7 years, and there could be something that's like your book deal doesn't come through in time for your vote to go through. Like, it's that part of it.
So has that like changed y'all's view of like things are changing?
At this point, I don't think that I'm gonna go into academia, but I also, yeah.
All right, each group could take about 30 seconds and maybe summarize briefly a couple things you want to share with the entire group. Assign a spokesperson.
I'm always the spokesperson. You know, it's okay to let somebody else shine today if somebody wants to. All right, I'll take
You're outside of academia,
Like, 'cause I wonder.
and you have done all of this, you're making lots of money. Why would you go to academia? Like, and
Well,
10
my
years
grandpa
into your
already does,
career,
and I
why would
don't
you
know.
keep
So,
$1,000
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know, my advisor, she was working outside of academia and then she went back to get her PhD. So with her master's, she was doing tests. And she's like, the bane of my existence now is the Facebook flash.
All right, ready?
She's like, I could look back and see when I had money.
Ready? 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 Okay, who wants to go first? Observations, shared observations. Let's group.
So we were talking a little bit, or actually kind of a lot about, like there used to be more, I feel like, the sense of permanency. Like you went into your first job, you got tenure, and you stayed on that tenure line. And I feel like now there's a lot more mobility. And then we also talked a little bit about, sort of in that same line of thought, how people might be taking jobs that maybe aren't a great fit for them or feel pressure to take jobs just as like stepping stones into what they ultimately want to do.
Sure. Thanks. Who wants to go next?
You can go next. So adding on to that, because we have a lot of those same concerns, but the pay discrepancy between different areas of faculty members. So Carrie had given an example of one faculty member in business, College of Business, and another faculty member in a different college, and their pay was just completely different, even though they're doing the exact same thing. And then just the competitiveness of the whole job market can be really challenging, and yeah, you don't want to get stuck, and once you're there, do you stay in that job and suck it up and just get the experience, or be thankful that you have a job, or do you try to go and get out in the job market again, and that can be kind of a really tough cycle to break.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. You guys want to go?
Sure. We ended up talking a lot about finding a niche within your discipline that makes you marketable, and how that can make a real difference on where you might get a job. And then we talked more generally and briefly about things like age biases in the workforce and the need to move to location when I'm done.
Yeah.
I don't know what else, but yeah. I like commute, but I'm
we talked about there's many people looking for jobs than the jobs. And also most of the jobs require more skills, like being more prepared to teach than what like traditional school would give you, like the skills. So there's a challenge of having enough skills to get into the market. And then another thing we talked about is the disconnection between the academia and the profession, outside the professional world. You can just go from academia and go to the industry because you don't have enough training for that.
Yeah, that was brought up, I think. Having one foot in each place. Yeah, absolutely. Last group back there?
We talked about the competitiveness as like our main view of it, and the actual like process of getting a job is so intense, but yet the position you would actually get, the pay is pretty low, and you're not exactly highest on the totem pole.
So you'll point out some real, valid, important concerns. You know, one of the things we know about higher education is, right, it's not what it used to be. And I think this group I heard some conversation around this. And I also heard the word, almost in every single group, terrifying. Terrifying. That always worries me, that people are terrified, right? I hope that even after today's short conversation that you don't feel as terrified, or not terrified at all. But part of the reason we're terrified is because of what we hear, what we understand, and what we don't understand, right, about higher education. It is a scary time in higher education, right? It's unprecedented. We have a major decline in state funding for higher education. You know, you can look at any institution and see a nice graph of like, you know, the money that states provide for higher education, right, going down, and tuition goes up, right? And that's a reality, that higher education institutions are fiscally strapped. And because of that, it emphasizes the stratification within the higher education enterprise, right? So there are the prestigious institutions that have large endowments, that have resources, and there are state institutions like Mason that struggle because those resources that were once available to us are no longer. That does not necessarily mean that you can't get a job or that it's not a good job. But it is an important, sobering, unfortunate, unhappy, sometimes depressing reality, right? We also know that partially due to that there is an increase in and a narrowing of what's considered appropriate faculty productivity products. Like what are the products that are valued within an institution, right? There are many ways that we can, as faculty, work around that or work within that, or think about this as a career stage issue, and we'll talk about some of that today. But we do need to be mindful of that, right? There is strategy, right? In any job you've ever had, you figured out what the strategy is to be good at it, right? And, you know, one of my first jobs out of college is I was like a customer service representative for the publications department at the Rand Corporation. It could not have been like a lower level job. Like I did so much data entry. And I also played really bad, really low level, this was a while ago, right? Computer games all day. And use instant message, right? But my point being that, right, even in that job, I realized like, okay, I just had to like, you know, put in this much data every day and then I could play around. If I played nice with these people, I might get a raise or a promotion, right? Every single job, there's a certain amount of strategy. And we can learn that strategy and therefore it becomes less terrifying, right? Because we know how to be successful in these jobs. But we do know that that within that strategy, there are certain products that are valued more than others, and we need to be mindful of those. You know, we do know that there's an increase in contingent faculty. Some of you, I think, are, you know, exploring that option. What does it mean to be a lecturer versus a tenure track position? Well, what does it mean to be, you know, a sort of freeway flyer adjunct versus a tenure track position? What that means for tenure track people and tenured people sometimes is that we have to do more service work because there are fewer of us. So that faculty work can feel and be additive. Everything gets added and nothing gets subtracted. And I think some of us see that in the faculty that we work with, that they're working really long hours, that they might not necessarily have a good strategy for how they are going about their work. And so it just gets piled on and piled on. Let me tell you, it doesn't have to be that way, but you may be seeing that. You know, so what I want you to understand about the landscape of higher education, right, is that what we hear sort of in, you know, in PR or in public media or in the campaigns right now is that, yes, we do have a market that is fiscally strapped. We do have an increased stratification. In some cases, we do have a shrinking of the tenure track market, but that even within that context, that we can think of these jobs as being very high levels of job satisfaction. In fact, all national studies of faculty show that we have some of the highest levels of job satisfaction of any other profession. Because part of what we decide to do as faculty is we engage in a vocation. And this is a labor of love. And if anyone in here in engineering or the sciences, you will definitely not make more money as an academic than you will in industry. You will make about half typically. But you are gaining much in that process. And it's an important decision to make. And we'll talk through the sort of like, you know, having those conversations with loved ones, spouses, partners, children, etc. Because it does matter that you are making, in some sense, that sacrifice in order to have these other gains. But do remember that it is a vocation. You know, some of you talked about, you know, geographic mobility. I got my degree at University of Southern California. There are a lot of universities in California, right? And that means there are a fair number of jobs. But there's also a lot of people that have my degree in Southern California. So when I go on the job market, like, I'm not that special, right? Because I kind of, you know, especially as a new graduate, there's a lot of people that have my degree. There's a pick amongst us that were trained through the same program, by the same faculty. We're not all that different, right? So where did I get my first job? Old Dominion University. How many people are willing to move all the way across the country? Silly me, right? All the way across the country. But I was probably the only person with my degree, with my specialty, who was trained by those faculty in that job pool. It makes me shiny, right? It makes my nice little papers, and now it's all PDF, right? My little PDFs different. I'm distinct. I'm unique. And so there is a reality there. I really wish when I was, you know, much younger and in my master's degree program, somebody told me, don't go to school where you want to live eventually, because I wouldn't have gone to school. I'm from New Mexico, so I wouldn't have gone to school in the West, right? But that's what I did because, you know, I wanted to move back there, not realizing that if that really meant I would never live there, right? So there is some realities there. If you want, in certain fields that are highly competitive, and this is not just discipline specific, it's field specific, right? You can, in each discipline, there can be more saturated job markets than others, right? So it's field specific. There can be the need to move in order to get that first and particular tenure track job. That's a personal decision, right? You may not want to move. You may say, I'm rooted here, kids, family, just I like the weather or whatever, right? You know, community, I don't want to move. That does change your opportunities. And you need to be realistic about that. You need to think about what you can do in regards to those limitations. If you are willing to move to the hinterlands, as there's an article that I have students read about that, you know, I have plenty of friends that live in North Dakota and Montana and Iowa, places I don't really see myself living. And they have very, very happy lives, right? What's great about those areas? Low cost of living, right? Great sense of community, really amazing, you know, people amazing values, right? I lived in Michigan for a while. You know, there's lots to be gained by living in those areas. And it also doesn't mean, as some of you talked about, these stepping stone pieces, that you have to be there for the rest of your life. Although you may like it so much you want to. You can, and it is common now, that we do have more mobility. I think this group over here brought this up, that we do have more mobility in faculty work. No longer are faculty generally staying at one institution for their entire career. Often you get poached, as we call it, recruited by other institutions. So it is not uncommon for there to be what I would call advanced assistants that move from maybe a less desirable location for them personally to a more desirable location. So in your first job, those are opportunities that you can explore, that you can strategize about. Come on. What this does mean, though, is you have to think about the competition as a new graduate who is going in the pool of job applicants and what that means in terms of the trajectory of the job search. Here's what happens. If you're in a desirable location, like George Mason University, because it's, you know, it's in DC, I like living here, right? In my field, the last time we hired an assistant professor, we had 160 applicants. In computer science, for example, because I work with them, most Typically, they get between 500 and 1,000 for one job. Now, that they have an international draw, so that's part of it. They're drawing, their applicant pool is coming from around the world. Now, other fields, you're trying hard to just get a decent applicant pool, right? Again, it's very field specific. If you are in a desirable location, you're gonna find that there are a lot of what I would call advanced assistants in the pool. People they went to the hinterlands for 2 years and they're like, I did my time. I sat, I wrote, I did my, and now I want to move somewhere else. Those jobs are typically early in the job season. All of you know the job season kind of starts like early September and can extend all the way till, you know, April or May. And often those people get those desirable jobs, which is why if you want a tenure track job, you have to think about finding ways to be geographically mobile. Because the last time we did a search, we did not consider ABDs. And eventually, we basically, this was for a new assistant job. We looked at advanced assistants and postdocs. Because we could, right? Because that's what was in the pool. Faculty job searches are highly idiosyncratic. Highly. I've seen the craziest things happen. You have no idea what's going to happen. You start a search and you have no idea what's going to end up, and it's weird always. But what you do, and it is very dependent on the pool that's there. Do we have a personal bias against ABDs? No, we were fine with considering ABDs. We just didn't have to because we had such a healthy pool of applicants, right? So it just depends on who your papers, right, your CV and whatnot is kind of standing next to. Other reality check. You don't get paid very much, right? We talked about that, right? But you also don't get paid very much. It's dependent on the national or international market, not on your cost of living of where you are. And it's also dependent on institutional type. My husband used to work at American University. From the moment we both started our jobs, we started our jobs at the same time. I always made 80% of what he made. Man, it bothered me every year, right? Like, come on, equal pay, right? But it wasn't necessarily a gender issue or even a field issue. He was at a private institution. And private institutions tend to pay a little higher. His health insurance benefits were terrible though. So I always argued that I made up. Wow, like people are like surprised I don't make more money. Like, you're faculty, right? That's supposed to be prestigious or something. Like, no, it's not prestigious, but they think it is. They think we make a lot more money than we do. So you really want to ask people in your field, figure out what is that dollar amount. You can do Google searches and a lot of this information is available now. And really be realistic about, is this amount of money going to work for me in the context of all the other pieces that go into this. So we want to be honest about the fact that you may need to move, right? And that you might not make as much money as you would imagine that you would make. So really sort of dig into that and make sure that you're knowledgeable about that. We talked a little about competitiveness, right? It's all over the map. And never don't apply for a job because you think it's competitive. Let's see, every time I've been on a committee, we have not hired the top candidate for various reasons. They didn't accept the offer, we thought they were gonna be the top candidate and they interviewed poorly. There's been times where we've hired the 4th and 5th candidate, right? So you never know what's gonna happen. People are also moving around a lot and getting other offers. And so last few searches, what I found is that people already accepted jobs or they got a job offer and they were gonna interview here, but they felt like bird in hand, right? So they wanted to accept that job. So you just don't know what's gonna happen. So even if you're in a highly competitive field, don't necessarily think you don't have a chance, right? If you don't, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You're never gonna know if you don't just go in and put yourself out there. And there's ways to distinguish yourself so that you are more marketable. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. One of the things, so it was probably about 2 years ago, I was in a meeting with a student and some faculty, and this is one of those, like, I'm gonna be totally honest with you moments. A faculty member said something that stuck with me. She said, in my field, right, my department is not in the top 10 of, all universities around the country. Maybe top 20 would be how I would look at it, but we're not in the top 10. So if a student comes to me and says, I want to be a faculty member, you know, you are gonna stand up against these other candidates that did get their degrees at Harvard, at, in my field, Michigan State, University of Southern California, UCLA, right, UPenn, right, all of these other institutions that have, that are considered sort of socially and culturally more prestigious. Does that mean you don't have a chance? No. What it means is that you have to show your seriousness. You have to go a little bit above and beyond. You can't rely on the prestige of where you got your degree on the job market. You have to rely on the nature of your work. You know, I personally see that as a challenge, right? Like, I'm like, yeah, I don't want you to hire me just because I went to Harvard. I mean, good for me, I guess, but I want you to hire me because I do good work, and I work really hard, and you know what? I'm awesome. That's why I want to be hired. So what does that mean when it comes to these papers, right, these job dossiers? It means you got to be mindful of having publications, right? You got to be mindful of the methods and the methodology of your work. You have to go a little bit above and beyond. I was at a conference this last week, the American Educational Research Association in DC, and I was on one of my former grad students was presenting a paper that mostly she did on a panel, and there was another guy who's at UVA who's getting his degree, and he did 62 one-hour interviews for his dissertation. I mean, that's above and beyond, right? And so the social science, that's above and beyond for a dissertation. Like 40 is high, you know, 62, I'm like, how did you get 62 students? But right, that's what I mean by like your methodology, your methods. You have to show a seriousness, a commitment, a dedication. You have to shine more because of your work than because of the degree, because of where you got your degree. So don't, and some of you in different fields, that might not be the case. You may be one of the top programs in your field or discipline. But still, don't rely on that, right? Rely on you and your work. And show them, right, how amazing and awesome that you are. That's what's important. Comments, questions?
Do you think that it's kind of sometimes a little bit more difficult for those of us that are in grad programs and are also like working in higher ed? You could probably speak to in higher ed, like doctoral program, and you're working full time in higher ed. Like, do you think that committees kind of, I don't know.
So this group brought up this sort of idea around ageism, right? I think there are two responses to that. One is everybody has the same number of hours in the week. If somebody has more, please share. I'm still trying to figure out how time machines work and, you know, get one of those. And so of course, right, in terms of being able to produce publications and work with faculty on research projects, like you're working, so you don't have that time during the day to engage in those. So the answer is yes. Is it impossible? No. Does it require more time? Absolutely. What I see in my department and in others is that those students take longer to graduate because you just need more time. And that's not a bad thing, right? Nobody goes, oh my gosh, you took 4 years, you took 6 years, right? And I don't think nobody cares, right? I mean, as long as you don't time out in the university standards, you're good. So it just takes a little more time and a little more strategy, let's say. You know, in terms of how that's perceived on the job market, you know, you should never look at your professional experience, particularly if you're in a professional program, but arguably, even if you're not, as a deficit. There are a lot of young 25 to 20, and I was one of these people, 25 to 28-year-olds who went what we would call straight through. I did have that customer service job. Technically, I did not go through. It was very important. But, I mean, for the most part, I did, right? And there are a lot of us. What we lack is the real case study knowledge, the experiential knowledge, the ability to relate to practice, right? The networks and relationships within the practice of those particular fields. You know, the whole theme of the largest education research conference that I just mentioned was around public scholarship, right? This is value, this matters. And as a person who has been in those areas, those sectors in one way, shape, or form, that is an advantage, not a disadvantage. When I teach 701, I have students who they're apologetic about it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you should be working this up in your materials and telling people what you bring and that those unique attributes, those opportunities that other candidates in that pool are not going to have. So I would say it is absolutely an advantage. It's only disadvantage if you write it as such, right? So you want to be very clear about what that brings to these faculty jobs, not what it takes away from it, because it doesn't.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Making sense? Just go away now?
So, some of us are in the rehab science program, and we have professional backgrounds from a clinical standpoint. So, could you give us your impression, with regard to industry versus academia,
Yeah.
are professional programs going to place a higher value because you have experience or because of that, or no?
Absolutely. Think about the classes that you've taught and where your instructors have had or have not had that clinical experience, that professional experience, and the different ways that they were able to enrich a classroom environment. Right? At some point, my guess would be you and the students in those programs have to go out and have a real clinical experience. How do you prepare somebody for that real clinical experience if you've never been the professional in that environment, right? Someone could argue, yes, I can, and here's how, but you can argue from a much stronger standpoint by saying, here's what I learned as a clinician, and here's what I could bring to preparing students for that environment, for being successful in that environment. And that's really invaluable. I mean, I think committees look for that. They want that. They want their students to have a really positive learning experience. And that's done by having both practitioners and scholars and former professionals in those fields alongside a mix of other faculty. I mean, in my field, it's hard, right, to find former practitioners who are also strong scholars. Because you spend a large portion of your time and effort in those practical professional environments. And then to transition, not a lot of people do because you take a ginormous pay cut, right? Like my friends who go in the policy work and they graduate and they go work 12 months and they get these really great pay. I have a student who just got a job. She's making more money than I'm making. Great. And they make this money and then they're like, oh, I'll come back to the academy. And it's like, well, okay, but you realize you're going to end up you're going to take a 30-40% pay cut. And maybe there's a stage in your life that totally works, right? But probably not when you're putting your kids through college, So you have to, right? I mean, that's that sort of 1 foot in each area. You always have to be mindful of is yes, you can't keep 1 foot in each area. You are in some sense doing more work because they can feel like two different environments. At the same time, what's the advantage to that? Is it reasonable to consider at some point in my life I can take that pay cut and go do this kind of work? And my friends and colleagues who are around my age haven't done that yet because they're not at that life stage. Does that make sense?
Do you suggest that you have to defend why you would take a pay cut? Would that set off any bells going, man, why would you? Did something go really wrong? Is that why? Is that something that will come up?
We had an assistant professor in our program prior to the one we have now, and she did that. She was the director of diversity at Penn State. This was some years ago, so I hope I got that correct. And then, yeah, she took a 30% pay cut, but she talked about this actively, right? She said in her letter, I got my degree, this is what I really want to do,
She got ahead of it.
She didn't say I'm going to take a pay cut, but she did talk about, on the interview, she's like, this is what I want to do, and I recognize that, there's going to be some differences in terms of my, compensation and things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, I think you're just you're honest about it, right? That's what you're wanting to do. Anything else? Okay, so, right, we talked about this, different stages. Okay, so what have you all talked about? I was curious, this is the book that we use for the 701 class. It's a really great book, so if you don't take 701 for some reason, I highly recommend that text. What have you guys talked about in terms of preparing for the job in 601? I know some of you are are sort of new to these workshops, but some of you are in the class. And any insights you want to share with new people or just?
Like networking stuff.
Okay. Doing a lot of
I would say networking and also like preparing for publications and presentations while you're in grad school to help set you up to have a stronger CV.
So building CV kind of stuff. Okay.
Teaching philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. You're developing a teaching philosophy. Okay, so here's my little tips. Maybe I should have named them like Jamie's top 10 tips or something. So these are all related, right? The most important one is, I think, one you've already talked about, which is networking. Hiring is a human business. It's social. This is no different than getting hired for any other job. What do we know about getting a job? It's almost always about who you know. There was a research project done a couple years ago that said that 80% of jobs that people get have to do with who they know. The academy is not that different, right? It really isn't. And we like to sometimes think it is, like, oh, it's supposed to be this, very theoretical, like the patches and the, I did wear a coat yesterday with patches. But it's really about networking. And where you network is in national or international associations. So someone over here talked about sort of a bi-national reputation, like you got a lot of conferences to go to, right? I mean, it's really about putting yourself out there, right? And I know that some of us are more, it's easier to do than others, right? Call yourself an extrovert or an introvert, or I had a good day or a bad day, or, I'm good at small talk, I'm not, or whatnot. Regardless, you have to find ways to really coach yourself into being a good networker, right? It is a skill. It's not because we're an introvert or extrovert, it's because these are learned behaviors, right? So I had a colleague years ago, I would say she's like the best networker I know, right? Like, Sue seems to be super extroverted, someone like you know Pam Eddy, like she's like bubbly, full of energy, runs 10 marathons a day or something. And she said, I really find networking awkward, right? And I was like, I think there's no hope for me, because if you think it's awkward, I'm done for, right? And I was like, what? Like, what do you, like, how, what? I said, well, what do you do? Like, help? And she said, well, I decide that every conference I go to, I'm going to meet 5 new people. And once she's met 5 new people, she's satisfied her sort of quota. And she's like, sometimes I just do it all in one day because I'm just so nervous about it. I'm just going to get it all done today, right? And sometimes I'm just tired and I do like 1 a day or something. But I think that was a really, what that said to me early on in my career was that, like, you need to have a strategy. Like, you need to think about how I make this happen. Like, it's not like I just show up and like, everybody comes to meet me, right? It's rather that you have to think through how to be successful at this. So everybody can be good at networking, right? Just figure out ways that it's going to work for you. And, it can be things like, you may not want to go to receptions and like go up to people like, hi, my name is Jamie, who are you, blah, 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 right? But it might be that you email people, scholars you want to meet, people that, you think go to the conference beforehand and say, are you going? Would you be, I've read your work, I'm interested in this thing, would you be willing to sit down for coffee? Right? And that might be an environment that's more comfortable for you. That's another strategy, right? How are some ways that you can find ways to network? Another is volunteering. These associations are all run on volunteers. I mean, there's very little staff that get paid to do this work. They love volunteers. It doesn't even have to be a formal volunteer, like you're the graduate student representative. Email whoever's running the program that year and just say, I would like to volunteer. They will find you work. They will always find you work. I will find anybody work anytime, right? So just email them and say, can I do something? And it's not about the work, right? It's about being in a space where you get to meet other people, and it's kind of less awkward because you have a task. Like, again, I'm not just at some, with my wine at some reception. I'm actually like, we're talking about some work, right? So that can be more comfortable for you. But it's really, really crucial. Remember, 150 applications. When I pick up one or look at one on my computer, I'm still like paper oriented. I'm always like, I feel like, and it says, right, Adrienne Thompson, and I'm like, I have that picture of Adrienne in my head. That means something. It's more personal. You are more likely to be in the I want to look at again pile than the I'm not looking at again pile. Do you see what I mean? It's crucial. And there's ways to learn how to do it. Most people would think I'm like super extroverted, and I'm so not, and I hate being the center of attention, even though I teach. See, you can learn. The other is, so get engaged in conferences, network all the time. Network on your campus, right? Get to know your fellow graduate students. Most of my really great friends I went to graduate school with. Like, we've been friends, we see each other twice a year at conferences, like we're gonna be friends for forever, right? Also other faculty. So you may not be working with faculty and dissertations, theses, etc., but like still get to know the other faculty in your department, because if you're in the job pool and they say George Mason, right, English or education, and they know somebody, they might call them up and say, hey, do you know such and such who's graduating from your program? And you want the faculty member to say, yes, I do, and he or she is great. Not, yeah, I think I had him in class 3 years ago. Yeah, they were fine, I think. You know, just like, I can't remember because it was a while ago. And there's a lot of students and a lot of faces, you know. So also get to know the faculty in your program. So one of the things that's important, and this is like the beginning of it, right? So this isn't what your goal, this is you getting towards those goals. Is connecting your name with concepts and ideas within that national or international stage. So like one of the things we just did, Carrie and I did at a conference, is we put on a symposium. Or we put in a proposal, we pulled some scholars together, Carrie chaired it, I was some sort of discussant, and what was important was that, you know, in Carrie's case as a graduate student, her name was there with these concepts, in particular learning analytics. She stood up there. People saw her face, learning analytics, right? It's about these ideas, these terms getting like, you know, connected to you, like tag, like keywords or something over time. You can do this through like, you know, different websites. You can do this through publishing, right? But think about ways that you start to get engaged. Your name becomes connected to these different ideas. It can just be presenting at conferences, right? It can be joining different special interest groups within those national and international associations, but figure out ways that you can start to become a part of that community and get your name connected to those terms. And ideally, right, that's what you're doing your dissertation or thesis work on. So you're like continuing, right, this narrative out there about you and these different ideas. And this is all a part of that really crucial thing of building a CV. I mean, at the end of the day, a job search committee is looking at paper, right? And it's very few pages. For the most part, you almost always need to send in a cover letter, and you have to send in a CV. In 701, we work through all of these, right? There's a lot of pieces to that I'm not gonna go over because we'd be here like for 5 days, but you're gonna send those in. You might send in a teaching philosophy depending on the type of job. You might, and often, you're sending in a research statement. And then you may be sending in reference letters, or those may just be contact people, or you know, the contact information for those individuals. Right, but your CV, I can tell you that there are 2 places that search committees start when they pull up your documents. You either started a CV or you started a letter. And people have different reasons why they do either. But that is really that's where you're presented, your paper, right? So you have to really think strategically about how you're building that CV. If you want a research tenure track job, right, like a place like Mason where you're teaching typically 2-2. Do you guys know what a 2-2 is? 2 classes each semester. Most research universities are a 2-2. Some, depending on in science and engineering, can be a 1-1, which means 1 class each semester. If you were in a sort of, I would call it a teaching job where you have very little or no research responsibilities, you're probably teaching a 4-4. Because that's a lot, right? That's all you're doing, that's a lot of classes.
Is that the same as a term, Professor?
It can be, yeah. So term, lecturer, what's the other one? Professor of practice. There's a lot of different terms used for this. They're effectively full-time positions, typically little to no research responsibilities, high teaching loads, and quite frankly, usually a little bit less compensation than tenured or tenure track people. There is still a hierarchy in there. Research positions, it was brought up over here. Usually, and this is the hard part, a lot of times they're soft funded because they are supporting the work at a center. And so that's the trade-off, right? You're doing research full-time, you probably don't have any teaching responsibilities. You might be able to build that in and for a little extra pay. That's trickier, but sometimes you can. But often they're, again, they're soft-funded. So you're supporting somebody else's research versus being a research faculty where you are the one building your research agenda. Tenure line or tenure track, tenure line or tenured faculty usually are the higher levels of compensation, and then it, goes down from there.
Is the university going to 5.5 per term? Because I heard that our department is changing our term professors and there has to be 5.5 or?
I don't know.
Nothing.
Above my pay grade.
That's a lot.
But these are important questions, right? So when you're thinking about these jobs, as you're reflecting on what kind of job you want and how you're going to prepare your materials for these jobs, even starting now, this matters. Because you are not going to be successful applying for a teaching job if you have no teaching experience, right? You're not going to be successful at applying for a research job if you don't have any research experience, right? So these things matter now as you're thinking forward. You could prepare for both, right? But you gotta prepare for at least one or whatever your goals are in the end. Again, not similar to any job, right? You need to talk to your advisor, right? And relationships with advisors are weird. I still have a weird relationship with my advisor. I don't know. It's really weird. I mean, I love her. She's fantastic. But it's also like forever she's going to be my advisor, I mean, it's just the way it is. Some of you have really positive relationships with your advisor. Some of you may not, right? It varies dramatically. What's important is that you keep your advisor apprised of sort of what you're doing because you're going to need that person's support. These are very small communities. It's like not 6 degrees of separation. It's like 2 degrees of separation. I mean, we get to know each other over the years. We see each other. I mean, it's really small. I've been going to all these conferences for 13 or 14 years now. That's a lot of time to meet people and to be known at your institution. So you're going to need your advisor's support at some point. If it's just a call or an informal conversation at a conference or whatnot. So communicate with your advisor. Even if he or she is a difficult person, really keep him or her apprised of what you're doing and try your best to have a positive relationship. Along those lines, find lots of mentors. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I was given early on in grad school was like, one person can't be everything to you. I don't know why, this was like enlightening to me at the time. I was like, really? Oh, of course not. Why didn't I think of that, right? You need lots of people behind you. Not everybody has the same strengths, right? So think about all different people in your community, in your life, in your degree program that can serve different roles. Try to find those mentors in national or international conferences. So a lot of my mentors, the vast majority of my mentors are not at Mason. Right? There are other places, and some of them were at institutions I've never worked, we're not even in this, we don't do the same research, but they're people I've connected with that I know I can call and say, I need some advice about this thing coming up. What do you think I should do? And so cultivate those relationships because they're really important as you move forward. There's a lot of complexity to academic jobs, and we'll always need advice, right? There's always something we need advice, and we need trusting people. Get teaching experience. Even if you're thinking about a research job, teaching experience matters, right? It's that thing that kind of it's one of those things that can elevate your CV a little bit. Like, oh, you're great at research, but can you teach? Because you're going to have to teach the third week that you arrive here, So do think about ways to do that. And there are a lot of ways on this campus to get teaching experience, like University 100. I know some of our students, and Carrie's done this, is gone to a faculty member and said, can I help you develop that course for free? I'll just be there to help you. And that can be a really great way of getting some experience in course development, and then hopefully you'll get to maybe teach a couple of those course meetings. There's a lot of ways you can get that experience. And You know, and also informational interviews, right? So along with finding mentors and meeting people at conferences is like talking to people. And as I mentioned, like there was a student who called, what was she doing? She was doing something for a class. And she's like, can I interview you? I have to do this. Oh yeah, sure, okay. So we were talking, and towards the end, she's like, I really want to talk to you about balance. I was like, okay. I'm very vocal on the national stage about being an academic parent because there are way too few of us and too few of us that are successful. And I have horror stories about what graduate students are told about having children. And it really makes me mad. So she said, I know you have kids. Like, I heard you talk at this or that thing. She said, but I talked to this other faculty member, and he said, right, he gets to work at 9, he works till 5, he goes to the gym, and then he goes home and he works from 6 to 10 at night. And so I just don't think that that's ever gonna work for me. Like, I wanna have a family, and I mean, I was like, what? Wait, he does what? I don't work in the evenings, I'm tired. And I don't work on the weekends, because I'm running to soccer or swim or, God, who knows what, these kids, they always got. You know, I'm busy as a parent, you know, having a family, but I'm still really good at what I do. And I think, you know, and I'm very successful. But I've learned to become more efficient, and I've made some strategic choices along the way about what I'm willing to be engaged in and what I'm not. And not everybody does this job the same way. And not everybody does this job in the same way throughout their career. There was a time before I had kids when I was an assistant professor, I totally worked 7 days a week, like obsessively. I don't know how or why I did that, but I did. I mean, it was really really unhealthy. I think back, like, what did I do? Like, when did I ever exercise? I don't even know how I did this. And then I had a child, and that changed changed things for the better. You know, so there's different times in your life that you can make different choices, right? So listen to other people about how they do these things, and don't decide that you can't do them, right? Talk to 30 people, not 2. Make sense?
Can I ask you a question about the experience? When you said like building a teaching experience, what about research experience? Like if your assistantship or whatever is with teaching, how do you strategically make sure you have more research experience?
Yeah, so some of the things that I have students do is they volunteer to be on research projects. You know, they know I have this project going or that project going, and they come to me and say, I'd really like to be invested. Is there something that I can do? And I've had students who work full-time who were like, I can't come to, you know, your grant meetings, or I can't do those sort of like face-to-face things, but I'd be happy to do a literature review for you, or you know, or analyze that data, and sometimes, you know, so they'll play a role in like a part of it, maybe not the whole thing, and then I have other students who are there like through the whole entirety of the project. So it really just depends. I think what you have to do is be entrepreneurial, right? Go to faculty and say, I'm really invested in this, what can I do for you? And be really honest about what your constraints are, and see if there's a way to really have some successful sort of synergy between that. I don't know a faculty member that doesn't like free labor. I mean, you know, it's nice. And sometimes that can turn into something else as well, right? You know, I mean, I do grant writing, and I have grants out there that who knows if they'll get funded, right? It's like throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, and sometimes something sticks. And then all of a sudden I have funding, and it's like, oh, well, so-and-so is doing a great job. I wonder if he or she would be interested in, you know, doing this, you know, continuing this work in a more intense way. That's actually how I got my first assistantship, is I volunteered as a master's student. And then I got funded the next year. I quit my job as my customer service representative. And then actually I stayed on that project for years during my doctoral work. So you never know, like, you know, what one thing will lead to. So that's what I recommend. But really be like honest, because what you don't want to do is say, I can do all this work, and then you can't do it. Like, that's really frustrating. But just being really honest that this is what I can do under these constraints. Thank you. Questions? All right, I'm gonna move through. This is way too short. Okay, here we go. So this is this whole notion about like talking to your advisor, right? Mostly, I'm feeling confused. You do know they expect you to graduate before hiring you, don't you? Like, this is one of those moments, like, you don't want to be in this moment with your advisor, like, you want to, you know, it's like, you really think you're going to finish? Not so much. Okay, so, while ABD, so first thing is, right, I like this is one of my favorites. Finish your dissertation, right? So while you're ABD, right, you're kind of right before that active search. Maybe you're like thinking about it, or you're really close to that, or that active search is coming in the fall. Finish your dissertation. Like, that is really priority number one. In that, I think the job search is very time consuming. It is challenging to be doing a search while writing a dissertation, although that's typically what we have to do. But the worst case scenario is you don't finish, right? So even if you get it, so here's what happens. If you get a job and you don't finish, and you show up at that, you know, wherever, University X in the fall, you can't teach because you don't have your degree. And by the way, your colleagues hate you at that point because you're like, you like just blew up our entire course schedule, like today, right? And classes are gonna start like next week. And right? And why didn't you finish your dissertation? And does that mean you have a hard time finishing things? Because if you do, we're in big trouble. Here's the deal about faculty work. There is no on-the-job training. Zero. No on-the-job training. Every other job you've probably gone into, you like ease into it, right? You show up, you figure out what's going on. People are kind of like, oh, you're the new guy, right? You don't know where the copy machine is. You barely know what your name is. Like, come here, we'll help you out, we'll get in. That is not, your on-the-job training is while you're a graduate student. You are expected to have all the skills and knowledge the moment that you put your foot on that campus, because your clock starts. You have 6 years to do what you need to do to get tenure. It's a really important, I say this many times because it's an important perspective. If you think about faculty work that way, then you know you need to be prepared, right? And you know that you need to hit the ground running. And that matters tremendously in terms of your long-term success. Journal articles, depending on the publisher, I'm a journal editor, we're fast though, can take 2 years to get in print. You know, if there's a backlog of articles to be published, it can take 2 years for print. Most of the time when you go for tenure, what matters is what's in print, not what's under review. So you figure if I got something accepted in my first year as an assistant professor, it's like 2 more years before it's like there in print. Right? So you got to get things done quickly. No on-the-job training, which means if your dissertation isn't done, you're in trouble. But here's what you want to do: get on listservs. You know, start reviewing job ads. There's some decoding of job ads, right? Job ads themselves are unique, right? You need to kind of look at them and start to understand what kind of terminology is used. You know, what's a professor of practice, for example, if that's in a job ad, right? Really trying to understand the nuances. Continue to attend conferences and network. We talked about, you know, presenting at conferences, planning like these symposiums, right? Getting your name connected to concepts. Start having, at this point or even earlier, different mentors review your CV and find weaknesses. Excuse me. You know, what are the things you should be doing, right? I did this for a organized like pre-conference for my field, and actually, well, I tried to hire the guy here, but he went to Utah. And I said, you don't have enough publications. He worked on some publications, and he has a job in Utah now. Write drafts of all these documents and get feedback. This is where PROV 701 can come in. Apply for PROV 701. And also start having those conversations, right, with partners, spouses, children. Excuse me. I'm not even sick and I don't know. Start talking about things like geographic mobility. What does that mean that you have to move? Is your spouse, partner in a job? Is he or she going to move? Does that mean, is that even doable for your family?
Does it matter what type of conference you present at? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if you present at these big national conferences, it's really great exposure, it's really good on your CV, but there are also some smaller conferences that are a little less daunting to do at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, our field is unique, like ARA, which I know you were just at.
Yeah.
So we had a symposium, and the computer scientist we collaborate was there, and he's like, I've never been to a conference this big in my life. Like, I mean, it's uniquely large. I think you want to try to do both. Regional conferences can be really, or small conferences can be great because it's easier to network. Like one of my favorite conferences I go to every year is 200 people. I mean, it's awesome. Like, we're like this family. We get to see, you know, every once a year we have the family comes together. And I mean, that's where I've have some of my best, deepest, most significant like mentor relationships. So I think those are really valuable. But you also want to show that your work has national significance. And then that happens really on that national stage. So as much as you can, you know, maybe do like one national and one regional, one big, one small, something like that. And I know that, right, these cost money, and that's an issue. I slept on many hotel room floors as a graduate student, where, you know, 5 or 6 of us packed into a hotel room. Those are fun days. You know, so, you know, there's ways of trying to make that work, or, you know, and regional conferences can be nice because you might not have to stay overnight, so they can be a lot cheaper. So, and usually the conference fees are cheaper too. Yeah. But good question. You know, so really, and this is what I think is really important about this stage, is really reflecting on where you want to work, right? So we've talked about, right, there are teaching, you know, full-time sort of teaching jobs. There's, you know, jobs where they're more research heavy than teaching heavy, right? So that sort of percent changes. There are, you know, differences in terms of private institutions and public institutions. There's community colleges, right? There's a lot of different places that you could work. And a lot of times these are not just connected to geography, although that's certainly a big part of it. They can also be connected to one's values. So, you know, one of the things that I've always loved about Mason is that it's very collaborative. And in fact, they value collaboration versus other institutions where that's not valued. And that's how I like to work. So for me, it's a good institutional fit. And this is really crucial, right? So what I tell my 701 students is, you gotta get a job and pay your bills. Like, that's real. I would never say, don't take a job and starve, right? But you do need to figure out at some point how to find a good, like, what is it that you want from a job, a department, at an institution? What do you value, and how can you find a place that shares, maybe not all, right? Let's not be too pie in the sky, but maybe some of those really important ones to you. And this is the time to start having those reflections. And it's going to be unique to you as an individual, but really think that through. You know, one of the reasons I moved from Old Dominion is after my first year, I was like, this sucks. Like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I was like, do I hate faculty work? I've been preparing for years for this work. Like, what else am I going to do? Like, this is, you know. And that summer, I spent a lot of time reflecting, and what I realized is that it wasn't that I didn't like what I do as a faculty member. I didn't like where I was doing it. Right? There was not a value congruence, right? So just like, you know, any other job, you need to think about the values that you have, how you want to do this job, what you want that institution to value in your work, and try to find some congruence there. It's really important. And try to do it now instead of like me later, where it's like, I moved all the way across the country. And actually, my husband and I didn't live together full time because he was still in California. It was very complicated. And so, you know, if you can do it now, do it.
Thank you, Francis.
Yeah, please.
Just, I was curious of your perspective. So like you mentioned for George Mason, collaborating. Are there, just from your perspective, are there other values that you perceive George Mason is somewhat, how you would associate with Mason?
It's a changing institution. Okay, so that's a complicated answer and a little bit more specific to me. So in every other higher education department or program that I'm aware of that exists in a college of education, I do not. I work in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. What that means is that I don't have the hierarchies of a college of education. I'm in, right, some of you are in chess, like I'm in this big disconnected college. Nobody is like telling me I can or can't do anything, right? In a lot of colleges of education, this is anecdotal, from hearing from friends and whatnot, is that there's some approvals that need to be given. It almost sounds like the mob sometimes, in order to like collaborate with other colleges. Like people develop territories and turf, and you know you have to get kind of the approval, right? I don't like being told what to do ever. Like that's just me. So I would not want to have to go like kiss the ring on the hand to be able to go collaborate with engineering, for example. So for me, like my placement means a different set of values than I would, like I have structural differences. So So that's my situation, if that helps a little bit. So, right, you have to think, like, yeah, it's complicated, right? These are big, large organizations, there's a lot of complexities to it.
I'm just keeping an eye on time. The
Yep.
workshop session is supposed to end at 2:50.
I know.
And so I'm not sure if there's any people who
Yep.
they have to leave.
If you need to go, I certainly understand. I won't throw anything at you as you
I have to leave, so-
Quickly, I'll go through this. You know, again, as you start your active search, communicate with your advisor, right? Make sure that he or she knows that you're on a search. The worst thing to do is like you're at a conference and someone's like, oh, hey, did you know that John applied for my job? What? John, no? I mean, that's not a good sign, right? You want to be able to say, oh, yes, I know. And in fact, I was going to talk to you about John. And let me tell you how great John is, right? Communicate with your advisors. Right? Finish your work, as we discussed. Do a reality check. And do a reality check with your advisor. The question I get all the time is, do you think I can graduate in May? I'm like, that's not my choice, right? I'm not the one actually writing. I'm not the one that's dedicating the time. Like, you need to answer that question, right? I can tell you what I think you need to do, but I don't know how many hours a week you're going to sit down and write that on that dissertation. Like, it could be 1, and if it's 1, no, you're not going to graduate by May. If it's 20, oh yeah, you'll probably be okay. But I'm not the one that determines the timeline. The student determines the timeline. So you have to do a reality check, right? You can do it with other people, but be really honest. Like, can I really go on the job market and be successful at finishing my dissertation? Because it also is exceptionally time consuming. You want to also, get recommendation letters or contacts. So, and this can be sensitive, right? Find out as much as you can through, peer networks, who writes good letters and who doesn't. One of the faculty in my program when I was a student had 3 letters. He had a don't really support, kind of support, and very much support letter. And literally, he just like plugged in people's names. If the worst thing to happen is that you're not the top one, right? So you need to find out, right, how and he wasn't an effusive letter writer. That was just his style, right? You want more effusive letters. You want people that you really feel that are going to write good letters or that are going to say great things about you and that have experience with you if there's a phone call, right, versus a letter. I mean, sometimes I have students say, can you write a letter? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, you were my class. And I'm like trying to think of things I could say, right? Like, you want people who can really talk about you in a deep, meaningful way. So like those research, volunteer opportunities can matter in those cases as well. Again, join listservs and check job ads, right? This is where you're going to get this information, and that is discipline field specific. Again, continue to conference and network, right? If you're applied for a job, you're really excited about it, email the search chair. Are you going to be at that conference? Can we sit and meet, right? Really put yourself out there. And that's a big year to do so. Make sure that you have a system. It gets complicated. Most students in like 701 are applying for like 20 to 40 jobs. I mean, it seems like a minor thing, but like it gets complicated. You need a spreadsheet, right? Have a system, and have a system of how you're going to do this work per week, because you also want to tailor each piece of paper that you send out for each individual job, right? So your cover letter, you don't have a standard cover letter. You have some paragraphs that you're going to put in every letter, but you really need to tailor that letter to each individual job. It's a lot of time. My husband was on the job market about a year and a half ago or so, and he said he spent a good 5 hours for every job that he applied. Just in like making sure that letter really fit that particular job analysis. So it takes time, right? Continue to do informational interviews with people. Right, and you can ask, like, if there's a place you really want to work, like you're not geographically mobile or you really want to move back to that place, find people at that institution, get to know them, and then sit down and say, hey, do you know if you're going to have any job openings in the next year or two? Like, I'm really interested in it. I did my undergraduate work there, or my family's there, right? These things matter, especially if they're not in major geographic centers. So one of the things we find with more rural institutions is that they really struggle because not everybody wants to live there. So what the problem they have, so I have some friends in Nebraska, and they had a job opening. And I went up to one of them and I'm like, Daryl, this person is on the job market, he's great, we were in graduate school, he was in his master's, I was in my doctoral degree, but we've kept up, blah, blah, blah. And his first question was, do you think he would really move to Nebraska? And I said, I've already asked him, and he said yes. But this matters, because what they end up doing is they bring people out, they spend all this money, they spend all this time, and all the people that come are like, no way, man, I am not living in the middle of nowhere. Like, it looked interesting until I showed up, and it's like 5 below 0, and this much snow, and no, I'm not doing it, right? So this really matters tremendously, because some institutions have a hard time recruiting. So when people say, oh, you get 500 applicants at Mason, that's not the case everywhere, right? So this is what I'm saying, like, you can get a job, but you have to be honest about where and what that means.